screens, it's a plot to drop the IQ. Fighting amongst each other over rumors that don't like you. Prefer us trapped in melancholy with the wood wands of holly. Suggestions that obliterate to camouflage the folly. Attempted mental robbery, executed sloppily. The hypocrisy, this mockery, and walk the talk with me. Put the hands up to touch the akasha, cause you know deep down there's something bigger than your wallet.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. My guest today is a realist, a promoter of self-responsibility, a magician, an occult demystifier, an ancient history unveiler, a truth seeker, an academic, an author, a documentary creator, and a speaker of power. Thomas Sheridan, it's a great honor to have you here today. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for that, Lindsay. I've never been called an academic before, but
I'll take it. There's a first for everything. Before we get started, I want to thank every single one of our listeners out there for being some of the best parts of my life and for being subscribers. I'm so happy that I made it to 1,000 subscribers. That is a very big deal, and hopefully that'll keep me off of YouTube's chopping block. We'll see. I'm still not sure whether it'll make me a bigger target or not, so who knows. But I'm very grateful for all of you subscribing and being part of this community. And so I'm also going to do another giveaway, and that is of my novel, Sine Curve of Aeons. If you would like a copy of that book, you can email corysharman@gmail.com. That's Quorri. Sharman is SCHARMYN @gmail.com. And just send me a screenshot of you doing any of these things. You can comment on a video, like a video, share a video on any social media network, share the channel on any social media, share the site rogueways.org, or you can share the Amazon link to purchase Sine Curve of Aeons. If you do any of those things, screenshot it and email it to me. That's one entry, so you can do as many of those as you like to try to enter the book. And I'm doing this until Christmas, I decided, or sorry, the solstice. I'm gonna draw the winner and announce it. So that is how long you have. What is that, like 10 more days, I think? So we've got some entries in already. If you want to be in the running, make sure to do that. And otherwise, you can find my memoir, my novel, my poetry, my articles, my photography, and even my tarot readings and life guidance on rogueways.org. So go check that out. So now, Thomas, in classic rogue style, I start with a pointless question of the episode. So I was going to ask you, why do you think that we sleep?
We sleep?
Yeah, why do humans sleep?
Oh, it's like SLEEP?
Yeah.
Okay, I have some very interesting unorthodox theories on that, actually. That's a great question.
Yay.
I believe that sleep is another side of us. We have this corporeal reality that we're experiencing, me and you, Lindsay, right now. And I believe that when we go to sleep and we enter into REM sleep, that we are actually off in another reality. Now, this is not a highly unusual idea, because within many shamanic and proto-shamanic cultures, this was considered the norm. It's only since the arrival of what we call the Abrahamic religions, where there's very clear demarcation lines between body and spirit, that came into being. If you look at the history of the Irish Druids, and there was a common thing where they actually entered into shamanic states, not through taking entheogens, but actually by eating meat. What they would do is, if there was a decision to be made within the tribal structure, like a new chieftain to be decided or whatever, the druid would drink the blood, a broth made from the meat of a freshly slaughtered oxen. Wow. Go to sleep under an oak tree, which is where the druid concept comes from. Drua is the Irish word for druid, is the oak tree. And during the sleeping cycle would get these insights regarding if the chieftain that was elect was the proper man or woman to leave the tribe or not. Now, this is a massive subject.
Yeah.
But, however, I do believe that now, which is the thing? Are we in the dream now, or is the dream that we have at night when we go to sleep and we have our hot chocolate at bedtime and go to sleep? Is that the real deal, or is this a joke? This is the great thing. This is the great schism, and I absolutely love this idea of the two sides of us. Now, if you look at the Greek idea of the whole concept of the Shatanic and the daemon, the thing is that the the daemon being the other side of us is communicating to us in the dream world or in the world of the oracle. However, during our waking hours, are we transferring our thoughts back to the daemon? So my belief is, until, you know, like I'm not hardwired to anything, is that yes, it's the two sides of us.
I'm really like fascinated with this. I'm with you because I've had too many experiences in the sort of dream world that have, I guess, bearing on this reality, whether it's a sort of a prophetic dream or whether it's like just the other night, I had a dream about someone in the Eyes Open group. And I told her like, oh, you know, came over to my house last night, my dream and whatever. And she's like, oh my God, I had a dream about you too. And I kind of knew that it was more than just, I feel like there's some dreams that maybe aren't us experiencing another reality. Maybe it is just kind of us going through, you know, whatever's in our head or something. But I always know when the dream feels a certain way, like it'll feel more powerful than others, or especially if I make eye contact with a being there, then that tells me that this is actually a real connection that's happening on some level. And I made eye contact with her in that dream. So I kind of knew, I was like, I didn't expect her to also have that same experience necessarily, because I think some people just don't remember their dreams, which also makes me wonder, like, what's happening to those people if they, you know, there's people who say they never remember any dreams, and like, where are they going or what are they doing then?
I have a friend in America who says that the dreams are deliberately wiped because there might be horrific memories of past life or an experience, a screen memory, you know, like a screen memory in your own life. And she's a very clever lady, and she was talking to me about this and this concept of the dream actually being wiped, but not wiped entirely, almost like the emotional residue of it left behind, in order to kind of highlight the nature and the profundity of the experience. It's you see, it's like the older I get, okay, the more I find it's difficult to reconcile that kind of like black and white existence of reality. We live in not only multiple shades of gray, but within those shades of gray, there are multiple shades of other gray.
Yeah.
So you try to encapsulate the sensation of like, does it mean this or does it mean that, within the logical framework of our Western conditioning. And, you know, I've traveled all over the world. I've met like people from all over the world. And what I have come to the conclusion is that it's unbelievably fucking complicated. But within that complication is the transcendental experience to guide you through this bullshit reality we live in right now.
Yeah.
That's why I would describe it. It's almost like a helping hand rather than a solution.
Right. I like that.
Yeah.
It's like the same idea is that, you know, people are like, well, is this like, you know, there's like fairy experiences and they're really similar to alien experiences and they're really similar to shamanic experiences. And they're like, well, is it aliens or is it fairies or is it, you know, us traveling in other dimensions? And I'm like, can it be like all of that? Couldn't it be all of that?
Exactly, yeah. We're pouring cultural encapsulations upon things. If you look at Irish fairy folklore, it's identical in terms of like the whole thing of people being captured and taken away by the fairies, and it's almost identical to the alien abduction experience. I remember when I saw Whitley Street. I bought the book first. I was living in New York at the time, and Whitley Strieber's Communion book came out, and by Bartoni's, I think is the name of the bookshop on Fifth Avenue. It's a famous bookshop, and they have that gigantic poster of the grey alien on the wall.
Yeah.
And I read the book and absolutely adored it. I thought it was a fantastic book. And I've read lots of books on, well, quite a few, not lots, but quite a few on aliens and UFOs. But I love the fact that Whitley Strieber went, you know, he sort of like pushed himself away from the concept of the alien and termed him as the visitor. And what he was describing was the classic Celtic and Nordic, like all cultures, this thing had been taken away by the fairies, right down to the point where he was on the spaceship and spoke about it in terms of being highly unhygienic and messy and disgusting. And yet, like,
Hmm.
and you look at the Irish accounts of people taken to the fairy world, they tell you it's like our world, but they're not, they haven't managed it properly.
Yeah.
They're, they have farms, like, they have farms in Ireland, but they're not tended well. The machinery is broken. The animals look sick. The
Huh.
crops are rubbish. The houses are broken. It's all very dirty. And they have an envy of the earthly people
Huh.
because we have nice farms and healthy animals and good machinery and good homes. And I find that fascinating.
Yeah.
Is that the shadow? Is,
Right.
it's so fantastic. And this is like when you get people saying, "Oh, they're spacemen from other planets." I'm like, it's really, you've got the McDonald's understanding of this phenomenon.
Yeah.
You do.
Yeah, that's the surface that you can just kind of breeze through if that's all you want.
Yeah.
Or you can look deeper and see this. That's an interesting idea of like, is it this sort of shadow of us? Like, is this because it was my brother who first presented this idea to me, but I think a lot of people have thought of it since then, which is this, if you look at the sort of classic idea of evolution, if it's real, that humans used to have sort of this wider jaw and narrower forehead and eyes kind of smaller and closer together with this like, brow, and then we sort of like get bigger eyes that are farther apart and narrower jaws as we go, and then grays at least seem like they would be like the logical conclusion of this. They have these huge eyes and big sort of frontal lobes and then really narrow jaws. And so is that us, in this like far future? And if so, is that sort of like we like ruined our world, we like let our farms fall apart and our everything kind of degrade over time?
There's also another theory to the greys and how they look. Uh, I'm not sure if this is mine. I might have spoken to someone about it. I mentioned it to Travis Walton when I did a talk in Houston a few years ago, who did that for a lovely man. And I said to him, like, up to his face, I said, I believe everything you said. I totally down with it. You had a fairy experience. You didn't have an alien spaceman experience. And he was
Right.
like very agreeable and, everything about it. You have to remember these experiences often echo the neuroses of the era. Now, for instance, gray aliens were a phenomenon that particularly are American,
Yeah.
that came into prominence in the 1970s. Now, in the 1970s, the United States was experiencing an economic downturn and a sense of national insecurity. I mean, I was 19 when I arrived in New York in 1985, I think. And so I was seeing that end of America getting out of that 70s schism, the post-Vietnam War schism. Now, what do gray aliens look like if you apply them to a human being? They look quite oriental.
Yeah.
They could be Vietnamese, they could be Japanese. So you had an America that was basically had this opinion of itself as being the greatest wonderful nation on earth who defeated the Nazis and the Japanese at World War II. In the 70s is ravaged by all these social problems and drugs and everything else. And you have the neuroses caused by the defeat to the Vietnamese. At the same time, the Japanese are flooding America, who they defeated with the atomic bomb, with electronics and cars and everything else.
Yeah.
Was the gray alien a fairy created by the shadow of American culture during the 70s? Because if you look at alien abduction stories in other parts of the world from the same time, they're not gray aliens. They're not at all. In South America, they're beautiful blonde women. In Ireland they've got, and Europe they have beautiful, what few alien abduction things you can find. They're gorgeous Aryan looking people. Gray alien is particularly an American phenomenon that came in the wake of this psychocultural neuroses that developed out of the defeat in Vietnam, coupled with the resurrection of Japan. We have to start looking at these things in very multiple holistic ways.
Yeah, it's like we're creating this, you're saying, out of our psychoses, and maybe in that sense, then it's maybe it always has been like somewhat of a warning, but also like a healing process for the experiencer.
Well, I'll give you an example. I grew up in Ireland in the 1970s as a kid. Now, Ireland at the time was a very dark place, particularly from the 1950s to the late 70s. the Catholic Church had an enormous sway over the country in a very dark and almost actually I will say demonic way.
Yeah, it seems
Now
evil.
we know what's come out about like the Magdalene laundries and the whole thing with like, you know, the babies buried in septic tanks and all that stuff, and the work
Yeah.
I've covered. Now, I can remember watching a TV movie when I was a kid called The Song of Bernadette, which was about Saint Bernadette in Lourdes in France. And the Virgin Mary in the film appears at the end of the movie as a specter. And I screamed as a child when I saw it. What you were supposed to look, it's a Hollywood film. I would ask people to check it out now when they go to YouTube after watching this. Check out The Song of Bernadette. When the Marian apparition happens, it's like a demon appears
Wow.
to me, and I screamed as a child. This is supposed to be like that. She's sitting there in a cloud. Saint Bernadette is dying on her deathbed, and I screamed. It was like the most terrifying thing. Now, this is the funniest thing you've ever heard. But as a little boy, I used to pray for the Virgin Mary not to appear in my bedroom.
Please keep her away.
Yeah, and it was like, and that's what that was our psychocultural shadow appearing through me as a little boy, and people like me. And then years and years later, when I came back to visit my parents in Ireland, I brought this beautiful American girl back with me, and I told her about, like, you know, the Ireland you see now is not like the Ireland I had when I was a kid. And we were in our parents' living room, kitchen, and that film came on. And I said to my old man, I said, now watch this movie. Have you ever seen this film? And he goes, I think I've seen it. It's a bit kind of stupid Hollywood thing. And I says, watch the very end. I was coming up to the end, and my mother and father were in the kitchen, and the film was playing. And I says, okay, wait for this scene. And I was in my late 20s at the time, and I had to cover my eyes.
You like still have that same reaction.
Yeah, and the scene where the Virgin Mary appears, and my mother and father, who were like, you know, like from a generation, both said, Jesus, fuck, like that is terrifying.
Yeah.
That is terrifying. And they said, I totally understand why that terrified you as a little kid.
Yeah.
So it's, you know,
perspective and
culture plays an enormous part in this stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because you can take the same sort of idea about how we, you know, pass everything through whatever lens of experience we've had. And definitely, I think some of that is, you know, like past lives or ancestor, you know, coming down through our DNA epigenetic memories or whatever.
Yeah.
But that you can transfer that over to afterlife experiences too, right? Where people, you know, if you're of like a Buddhist tradition, when you go and, you know, have your after death experience, you're going to have a very different experience, and different beings are going to meet you and whatever, than if you're a Christian and you're going to go, you know, see Jesus or whatever. So, you know, but it's all clearly, I guess I would assume that it's all the same place and it's all the same energies, but we're just processing them differently, you know?
Yeah, we just encapsulate them with cultural memes, that's all.
Yeah. Well, I want to also go back to the oak tree thing that you're saying the Druids would sleep under the oak tree, because I feel like I've kind of heard this before, but I don't really know anything about it. And do you think, I mean, were they sleeping under the oak tree because the oak tree itself was giving them some sort of insight, or was that like it was still coming from somewhere else and the oak tree was just kind of facilitating it? Or is there a reason why the oak tree?
Well, if you look at European paganism, now I'm talking about like in the Celtic Nordic times, not the stone circles from way back. That was a different culture. I'm talking about like Celtic, say Nordic, say Anglo-Saxon, that, you know, Viking, that kind of thing. And then you have like the Slavic and the Celtiberian stuff. Trees were very important. They didn't even bother with like building temples or megaliths or anything like that. They basically had the concept of the grove. And within the Irish, the pagan Celtic tradition. Now, I'm talking about specifically Celtic here, not the megaliths or the stone circles. I'm talking about this is a later arrivals who came to Ireland from Iberia, and who what we call the Gaelic people, and then they became the Celts of Europe and the Gaelic and the Druids of Europe. They were very fascinated by the concept of a tree having a kind of a language. So the forest was almost like a symphony of different species. Each wood or each tree type had a specific meaning. Now, the oak was very powerful in the European Celtic Nordic tradition. Because now I know you had the ash and the exil tree, and you have in Ireland the elm tree was also quite spiritually prominent, very similar to the Kabbalistic tree of life idea. Rather than you have each part of the tree going up, you had a different species of tree going up, but it's very similar.
That's
Now
cool.
the oak tree was almost like the foundational tree of all these things. You had the thing in the Germanic tribes of Dunner's oak, and you even have the oak men, who were kind of like guardians of the forest. If anyone stripped the oak from the bark from an oak, they would be executed by having their entrails removed and wrapped around the oak tree till they died and pinned to it. And that was the idea, was a life for a life, the life of man for a life of an oak.
Wow.
And this is where Dunner is Thor. And this Thor is very connected to the oak within the Germanic tradition. Now, in the Irish tradition, the oak tree was symbolic of, well, the power of the foundational energies of and the above earth energy. So you think of like the oak tree spread out like that, right? But it has the same amount of roots and the same intensity of roots below the earth. If you look at an ancient oak tree, it's kind of like a stumpy trunk. It's more rounded, but it's got a phenomenal root system and a phenomenal branch system with a big circle around it, okay? A trunk, okay? So that represented as much above and as much below. So the idea was that the druid, when he held his hands apart like this, or she, he with his cloak, represented the embodiment of the strength above the earth. However, the roots below represented the subconscious world. This is psychology we're talking about now. And so, as above, so below thing, I know it's a cheap cliche, but it's true, in lots of cross-cultural things. It's true, as above, so below. So you have the idea of the roots were firmly entrenched within the earth, representing the past, the tribe, the subconscious, the whole thing, where he's the manifest. So when the druid did this and put his arms out like this, this is where the Catholic priest at the homily in the Catholic Mass puts his arms out right before he says, "Take this, all of you, and eat from it." He's actually echoing exactly what the Druids said during their own rituals or their own masses or wherever they had themselves. The oak tree represents the eternal nature. Now, the oak tree is a fascinating thing because it's a tree that's not prone to diseases. This is one of the reasons why it became significant among you have like horrific diseases like the Dutch elm disease that wiped out all the elm trees in Europe back in the 70s. You've had diseases that affect ash, all the pine trees, everything. But the oak tree almost seems impervious because of its nature. Even the fact that mistletoe, I'll get that in a second, because of tannin in the root of the oak tree. This is where the song "O Tannenbaum," it's where the Germanic song comes from. It means it means almost like the medicine of the forest. And the oak tree is very impervious to disease. It can take a hell of a lot of battering and a hell of a lot. And actually, it's wood. When you build it, uses wood in construction, it actually gets stronger as it ages. So those stave churches in Norway are built with probably from an Irish or a Celtic tradition, who went over there and built those churches. They from Scotland or Ireland, using oak beams. Those beams are stronger than steel today. It's actually got stronger. Now the oak, because of the tannin, is highly disease resistant, except for one thing, a parasite called the mistletoe. Now the mistletoe became integral to the Druids as a kind of a magical vine that was able to penetrate what was impenetrable. And so therefore the oak itself represented the ability to, by associating yourself with the mistletoe, you could get into the impenetrable, beyond the nature of the oak tree and into its spiritual aspects. And this is how the oak develops as such an integral part Now, the word druid comes from drua, which is the Irish word for oak. And it's like the County Derry in Ireland is the county of the oaks. Derry comes from Dory, drua, which is the oaks. And that was one of the reasons the British Empire decided to make County Derry in Ireland the centre of the north of Ireland and called it Londonderry, because they tapped into the power of the oak, of the Derry, and of that. So there's like, we have this esoteric conduit that goes from the ancient world right into the present. And they give you Christianity, they give you Islam, they give you Baha'i, they give you New Age. But at the end of the day, I got a news for you. They are well aware of the ancestral lineage, spiritual, that that I talk about.
They're happy to just abduct that and co-opt it, and
yeah, here you go. There you go. You can have that. Play with your baby Jesus while we know the real shit.
Yeah, it's like this distraction. Well, I heard this really interesting concept lately that was on, I don't know if you're familiar with Crow 777, but he had someone on who was talking about how if you don't claim the part of your life that was in the womb and since creation itself, that part can be used against you in all these legal twisted ways, and that's like what the system is built on and whatever. But no matter what you think about that, he was saying that like that part is actually the Christ consciousness or something, and that's what you sacrifice on the cross of whatever that you're giving that away. And it was just an interesting way there's all these different ideas about like what Jesus is, or if he was a real guy, or if it represents something else. And I thought that was one more thing to kind of throw on the pile of possibilities, is that it's that time that we kind of don't claim for ourselves, and therefore it's used against us. We sacrificed it.
Well, those of you who have followed my work, like over the years, know that I have very little time for the Abrahamic religions.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with people in the Middle East being into that stuff. That's their gig.
Yeah.
That's cool. However, that was imposed upon our people in Europe. Now, I'm not saying that in a kind of a bigoted way that is better or worse or anything. I'm just saying this is just a fact we have to deal with.
Yes.
I speak English and not Irish because of colonialism.
Right.
I'm a Christian because of colonialism, not because my ancestors willingly converted. We have to start looking at these things. Now, there was a movement in Germany about 100 years ago that the concept was that, I'm not saying it's true, but it's definitely one of those things, like I said, we always have to be flexible, be the reed in the river or whatever.
Right.
And that Jesus Christ was basically Odin, and at some time in the Middle Ages, they took things like the Yggdrasil tree, the Immersol, the Dunar's oak, and they reimagined the European idea of the god dying on a tree, such as Odin. Well,
True.
Odin, he achieved enlightenment in the secrets of the ruins. Now, we have to be careful of that as well, because a lot of that stuff was written down by Christian monks, just like the Irish mythology.
Oh,
so
interesting. True.
It's always a case of running through that stuff.
Yeah.
That's why I'm a big, and that's why I tend to like jump back into Hinduism so much, because it is the sort of unbroken root of the Indo-European mystical tradition.
True.
But you have the concept of, that Odin was, that Jesus Christ. Okay, let's talk about the early days of Christianity. These guys came out of Syria into the Egyptian desert and started attacking pagan sites, dedicated to classical Greek and Roman gods. Now, what do we know about them? That they followed a guy they were Second Temple rabbinical Jews who had a belief that this individual called Yahweh or Christ was the Messiah, and they had been weaponized in the aftermath of the Jewish revolt, which has caused enormous psychological and mental and other economic anguish and misery in Judea.
So we already have trauma as like a part of this root.
Just like ISIS in Afghanistan, they will come out of that. And they attacked the pagan sites, and eventually they were considered more terrifying than ISIS because that's how they behaved. Eventually, Constantine, through various political machinations, decide that these Christians were probably a pretty good guys to bring into your army because they were fanatics. And then he took the concept of Democritism from Persian monotheism and incorporated it into Christianity and blah, 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 blah. We had the whole Jesus Christ on the cross thing.
It's completely 100% constructed.
Yeah, if you look at the early images of Christianity, the oldest image of the Christ on the cross is from somewhere at a children's school in Rome from about 300 AD, and it's a piece of graffiti from a school desk of a pagan child making fun of a Christian kid in his class, saying something like Joseph believes in the donkey man, and it's a picture of a donkey on a cross being crucified.
I kind of want that as a t-shirt, you know?
Yeah. So it's like, and then if you follow the story on forward, there's very little crucifixy kind of stuff going on. Now, having said that, the crucifix cross image was what? Well, it was all over the pagan world. You have the swastika. You had the Breed cross in Ireland, which you call the St. Bridget's cross, which is a swastika. Now, not far from here is a place called Crosspatrick. And it's a place where St. Patrick was. It's absolutely a bit desolate place in the middle of nowhere. In a place filled with megaliths, by the way. And but not on the kind of touristy megalithic thing. And here St. Patrick on this hill, this small hill, was supposed to have a showdown with the Christians, with the Druids. And that's all it says. Now, even on the official touristy little plaque, there are 2 crosses in this cemetery that are shaped like the Maltese cross. And they both, on tourist plaque, it says they're Druid crosses. And what were they? They were the Druid holding his hands out with his robes like this.
I can see it.
And so the cross was all over Europe. So it's like Christianity came along and the Roman Empire got Second Temple Rabbinical Judaism, paganism, and slotted it in. And had the perfect globalization religion to bring the empire together.
And we're still going strong today.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, like if you look at how say Ireland became Christian, well, it's absolutely zero, none proof St. Patrick ever existed. So you had a situation where you had someone working on behalf of the Roman Empire would approach chieftain or king in a part of Ireland and say, how would you like to do business with France and Germany and Italy? Wine, ships, you sell horses, we make lots of money, blah, blah, blah. All you have to do is become Christian and convert your people to Christianity. And this happened all over Europe. And then he issued a proclamation saying, okay, lads, you're Christians. And they say, what the hell is that? It's no big deal. It's a fella who just, you know, he died and came back from life and he was crucified and don't worry about it. And then slowly they became Christian. They took their archetypes and made them Christian. Like St. Bridget. St. Bridget was Breed, a pagan goddess. And they transformed her into a nun who died defending the cross. This kind of thing went on. It went on all over Europe and also became the template for how colonialism later on, how the British conquered India. The British Empire did not conquer India through sending an army in. They would go up to the various Rajas and say, how would you like your sons and daughters to go to Oxford or Cambridge? You have lots of copper and lots of coal. We have lots of money. How we do on ships, how about we do a deal? And that's how and all you have to do is become part of the empire, the British Empire. So the same template that the Romans developed to make us all Christians was the same template that became a template for colonialism. The whole thing is approach to leadership, get them to do what they're told, and they tell the people, hey guys, this is what we are now. And that's how we became Christians.
And now you own those people. It's similar to slavery too, right? They go in and they find the chieftains or whatnot, and they like, hey, how about you sell us some people?
That's happened in Africa. Yeah, that's happened in Africa. It's happened everywhere. And also, slavery is also war. People who lose wars.
Yes.
Well, we're not going to kill you. No, nah, you're going to pick sugar in Barbados.
So gross. So then now we have this entire world that's disconnected from its roots and has no, actual like culture, really, and definitely religion, if that's what you even want to call it, because it wasn't, I mean, I don't think it was, in those days, it wasn't something like, hey, do you want to be a, Celtic or a Druid or whatever. It was just like, this is what we do. Now we go sleep under the oak tree, and like, this is how we choose a new person. Like, this is just your culture, right? You're not like choosing it.
But however, saying that, I wrote a book called The Druid Code, and there's enough evidence out there to suggest that what we call the Druids, or the Celtic tribes, definitely developed out of a proto-shamanic culture that existed before that. How we know that is the University of Lisbon in Portugal did a fantastic research program about 5 or 6 years ago on fairy tales, and they discovered that European fairy tales always go back to the Bronze Age. So they showed that like things like Jack and the Beanstalk and stories involving blacksmiths, tales involving blacksmiths and shoemakers go way back into antiquity, and they use the same scientific process that's used in the study of botany and the development of flowers and the horticulture, and applied it to fairy tales, and discovered that the actual European fairy tale tradition that existed until about the 1800s went all the way back to the Bronze Age. So there was a real genuine continuum. But when Christianity came along, it turned elves into demons, fairies into monsters, that kind of dragons into devils, this kind of thing.
Yeah, demonize everything that you can't sort of turn into your own holidays and practices and traditions and sacred places or whatever.
Yep.
It's a pretty effective method of control. So the mistletoe, when you were talking about that, you were talking about the actual mistletoe like tree or bush itself?
The mistletoe is a kind of a parasitic vine that grows out of the side of a tree.
Is it because when we think about mistletoe, we think about like the little white berries and the little green sort of...
a fertility thing, kissing a girl and Anita.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
That's the exact same mistletoe?
The exact same mistletoe, yeah. It's
okay.
a parasitic plant that grew on the oak tree.
I did not know that.
Druids, because you could do anything, next to like chopping it down. You could do anything with an oak tree and it would survive. It was impervious to all diseases except for this mistletoe. Oh. And this fascinating. What is the main thing about this mistletoe that actually has a Now that may have also been the snakes that St. Patrick, because it runs as a vine around it. So this may have been St. Patrick's snake that he banished. Was the belief in the mistletoe as a sacred plant.
And so, does the mistletoe have? Because it's poisonous, right?
Yeah.
And does it have any sort of shamanic applications or any mind altering? Is it that kind of poison?
No. I just see, this is the thing that, again, we're back, like this whole thing of entheogens, that we think that every plant has to be ingested. But I just think the fact that it existed alone was enough.
It's the symbolism of it, yeah.
Yeah, the fact that it could survive was enough, Yeah. You didn't have to take it out of order, yeah.
Yeah, because it has, it's almost the same effect. It's like going into your mind and inspiring you to consider this possibility of energy or power that a living thing could have.
Absolutely.
Interesting. So what would you say, because I feel like there's a similar sort of practice that we see now, where we had gone in the past and sort of demonized anything that we couldn't co-opt. I feel like the same thing goes on today, but with information that is being controlled or suppressed. You know what I mean? So like, what's an example that I could think of off the top of my head? It's like if people start questioning something, there's like this demonization of the truth that is put out there, and there's also this like alternative, like, no, it's actually like this. I cannot come up with a good example right now.
Climate change, vaccines.
Yes, it's
European Union.
If you question this,
Trump.
You're evil, you're killing people, you're whatever, and here's the actual truth, and here's like the tradition that it comes out of, and it's like, it's so seductive, it's so effective, and they're still doing it today in like every single level.
peer pressure, bullying. That's really
Yeah.
what it's called. That's really what it is.
And that sort of pyramid scheme of like,
Yeah,
we control this and you follow us.
what you learn in school. You
Yes.
know, it goes on all through life. It's just the way things are. Uh, you know, I was probably born unbelievably cynical. I can remember never ever, even as a young child, never believing the TV news or life in general. I
Where
don't
do
know
you
why.
think that came from? Like, why do you think you had?
Having a clue. Having a
Yeah.
clue. Maybe did I pull it in from a previous life? I don't know, but I never believed anything. I
Yeah.
never believed the orthodoxy in anything, and I was always looking for a laugh, and anything that would upset people, upset the orthodoxy, not upset people, but
Yeah.
upset the status quo. So like when I was like 13, 14, the punk rock thing exploded, and that was like really big in Dublin and Ireland. And it was like, oh yeah, that's for me. And I used to like annoy the hippies at, like in high school, I would annoy the older hippies and stuff like that. And I'd be like, and you know, good naturedly and that kind of thing, not in a
Yeah.
nasty way or anything, but it just
Right.
felt good to be on the outside. And you know, and I can remember there was this friend of mine called Tommy Masterson, and he dyed his hair green. And the teacher told him to go home and do something with his stupid haircut. And he had it shaved into two horns.
That's
And it was
awesome.
like, just I remember thinking, that's how we should live.
Yeah.
That's how we should live, you know? And so I don't know where that came from. I was the only one in my family like that too. And not that they were ultra conservative or anything
Yeah.
like that. I was the only one that was kind of out there that way. I don't know. It was like it was always fun to me. Like when I hear people saying, like, you know, I've been doing this now, you know, since I wrote the book Puzzling People in 2011 or 10. So I'm at 10 years now almost. And I'm meeting people over the years, and they would say things to me, Thomas, I've discovered that the world is a lie. And I'm all nervous and scared, and I don't know what to trust. And I'm like, Jesus, it's fun from this point on, you know, just have a laugh,
Now
you
you're
know,
free.
now you're free.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, this kind of thing has gone on, you know, for a lot. I've met thousands of people all over the world, and it's like, oh, no, okay, you're out of the bullshit now. Your head is out of your arse. So enjoy enjoy yourself, enjoy life, and create and have laugh. I'll tell you what it is, Lindsay. A lot of people think they see, okay, when they wake up to the fact that the world is bullshit, their first instinct is, we got to change it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah. It takes a while to get
you're
past
back
that.
in the game, sweetie. You know, you're back in the game, my friend.
It's true, and it's really
Not to
impossible.
patronize you, but
It's
you're back
impossible
in
to
the
tell
game.
people. You're
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, you know, who made you the hero? Why do you believe that you have a right to change the system? Why do you even care?
Well,
Why? Because they put a revolutionary idea into your head. And what does revolution mean? To come back right where you started.
yes. Thank you. I've been very fixated on this lately because I see so many people who are like, well, what can we do about it? And what are we going to do? And what are we going to do? And I'm like, if screaming the truth worked, we all would have woken up a long time ago, because people have been screaming it for thousands of years. And I don't know, you know, I guess I'm like, maybe what you're saying, like, why do you even think you have the right to? But more importantly, like, there's really no point. I mean, you can live as true to yourself as you can, and when people encounter you, that's going to affect them. And there's nothing, you don't want to like hide the truth, but I don't know that you can make it your life's mission to try to wake people up or try to change things like you're saying. And then this idea that there even could be a revolution. I mean, the trick is in the word, like you're saying. It brings you right back to the point of start. And, you know, people have been advocating, it just happens every once in a while. People will be like, well, we need to like have a, you know, armed uprising basically. And I'm like, what you're really advocating for is that we go out and we kill people who are still duped by the system, you know? And like, how is that fair? You know, like, they haven't woken up yet, so we should shoot them? Like, it's never going to be something that's a positive result, you know?
You know, my great grandparents took part in the War of Independence here, and they were just ordinary. They were very, very poor men and women who had nothing.
Yeah.
When I say nothing, I mean destitute poverty, living in slums in Dublin. where literally a woman had to be a prostitute to survive. This would be like the turn of the century. And a man worked 14 hours a day in a factory or a mill or a shipyard or some shit job like that, like a slave. And they had nothing.
Yeah.
While they saw the wealth of the country being exported on these ships to Britain. So they had no choice but to pick up guns and go to fight for dignity, because death wasn't a problem. It was, if anything, a relief.
Yeah.
And these are people who didn't hate the English or didn't hate the British.
No.
They had no problem. Many of them would have known British soldiers that they were shooting at and stuff like that. It was nothing personal. It had to be done. Now
that makes sense to me.
It just had to be done. They were desperate. They were dead nothing. Okay. Now, the first place that I lived in as a kid was in a slum in Dublin called a Victorian slum, an awful place called Benburb Street, across from the Guinness Brewery. Now, we were Catholics, and even in the 1970s, when I was a kid, Catholics couldn't get a job there beyond menial. Now, you couldn't forget about it. You were a Protestant. You'd have to be a Protestant to get a job in management or any kind of good technical job there. Even though, now they were plastered over bullet holes in the roof of my bedroom when I was a baby from battles in the 1920s with the British Army and then the Civil War afterwards. Now, this was just absolute survival. There was no hatred involved. There was no, we're going to smash the system. This was literally, we've nothing. We have absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And all we have left is the ability to find a gun somewhere and shoot. And if I die, so what? I'm probably better off than how I live.
Yeah.
That's very different than people today who have iPhones and iPads and a computer, and I can talk to you on Zoom and Skype, and we can bullshit and have the roasties on Facebook, and someone's pissed off because you didn't fancy them and you blocked them. And this kind of fucking shit, right? They were literally
dying slowly.
So they had the right.
Yeah.
They have the right to take up arms. Okay.
It's a good way to put it.
We don't.
No.
You have no right to take up a gun and attack an American soldier or police person or anything, because that's just a man or woman just like you.
Yeah.
You're not living in destitute poverty. You're not trying to survive. So a lot of these people I know, that these gung-ho revolutionaries, right? Smash the system, man. Yeah. They're usually middle class or upper middle class.
They are.
Never had a day of fucking hardship in their lives.
Nope.
What they're really doing is the system that they want to smash is themselves.
It's true.
Because they haven't worked on the fucking shadow of themselves. And the reason why they feel horrified and disenfranchised with the world they live in today is because they haven't reconciled the shadow within inside themselves.
Thank you.
That's what that's all about. It's about nothing else, from Extinction Rebellion to Occupy to all these other middle class bourgeois bullshit revolutionary things. In Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, he talked about the affluent students of Paris speaking on behalf of the downtrodden masses, and yet they were well fed, well taken care of, and well looked after. And it's the same thing. It's like, if you don't have shit, you will fight for that. But when you have shit, no problems in your life, you will invent problems that don't exist.
Absolutely.
That's why the ultimate act of revolution, or should we say not revolution, insurgency, is to enjoy your fucking life. That's what it is. And
to, like you said, work on your shadow side. I'm glad you said that, because that's another thing I got into recently with some people, was like, aside from the fact that you're going to be killing pretty relatively innocent people, other people who are duped and not woken up yet, and all of these things that you're just talking about as well, you're also acting out of this very, I don't want to call it immature necessarily, but exactly that. You haven't yet even looked into your shadow side, integrated yourself. And so I'm like, the real task of your life is to work on your true self, your truest self, and to process as much as you can of like any of the trauma you've ever experienced, including in past lives, if that's something that you're able to do, but basically you need to work on your internal self, and it's the most revolutionary thing, like you said. And again, revolution is probably not the right word. Insurgency maybe is much better. Good choice. But if you're not doing that, you're wasting a huge opportunity, and you're going to end up right back where you started anyway. And when I say things like that, a lot of people are like, oh, love and light and rainbows. And I'm like, dude, it is not love and light to work on yourself. Like if anything, it shows me that you haven't, that you think it's love and light, because working on yourself is probably one of the most terrifying and life altering and foundation shattering things that you could ever do if you're doing it right. You know, if you're actually working in your shadow, that's not something that's fun and easy. You know, it doesn't look like that.
What's the best relationship? One that's a combination of happy days and fucking trauma.
Yeah.
Why? Because one makes you realize that the other is as vital to the other one. You know,
point.
like it's like, you know, these sort of like, you know, like these teenage love affairs that people want in middle age. They're usually horrible. They're unfulfilling. But if you look at this is the thing. Who's the one that you remember the most? The one who broke your heart.
Yeah.
Why? Because they were the one who said to you, "This is what's wrong with you."
Yeah. And you were like, "No, it could never be."
No. I'm a victim. I'm a victim.
Yeah. And this victim.
They were the vampire who held the mirror, and you weren't in the mirror.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, this victim culture is also overwhelming, because that's the other thing I see in these people who are railing against the system is, you know, the ultimate victimization. And it's like, I think it takes a lot away from people who are actually victims of actual, you know, crimes or harm is actually being done, for everyone to be so fucking offended all of the time about things that are very, very minor. You know, really come down to like something you need to work on in yourself instead, which is that's never even brought up.
Yeah, it's decadence. Yeah, they don't want you working on yourself, because if you worked on yourself, you wouldn't be looking at exterior forces. So you have this SJW who's incredibly upset that like they don't have gender neutral bathrooms at their university, you know, and it's the most horrible thing in the world. Damn. But if they were to stop them and say, why is it the most horrible thing in the world to you? Well, because it's offensive. Why is it offensive? Blah, 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 blah. Because someone told me it was offensive.
Yeah. It's based on nothing.
Yeah. It's the same with racism and sexism and everything else. It's because someone put it in. It's it all ultimately, you know, here I am on my anti-Abrahamic rant again.
Yeah.
But this concept of morality and decency are two very fucking different things. You know, those SS guards who were shooting, you know, Jewish kids, and that was morality. When they went home to their children to hug them, that was decency. Two different things.
Interesting.
Very fucking different things. Yeah.
It's like one's a legal code. It doesn't really care much for.
Yeah, a legal code. Yeah, the moral majority. You know, I always remember that when I first went to America as a kid, there was a big thing, the moral majority, and they were putting labels on albums saying that with the PMRC, the Parents Musical Committee or something.
Oh.
But it was Tipper Gore, Al Gore's wife, and I remember they tortured the band Judas Priest by try to make them responsible for the suicide of two kids who were out of their heads on drugs.
Oh, right.
They found the Judas Priest album, and it was like the moral majority. And we had them in Ireland as well. We had a thing in Ireland called the League of Decency.
League of Decency.
I know.
Sounds dystopian.
They were all like, you know, elderly. This is like when I was like in my late teens. They were like holy Catholic rollers who were trying to hold on to Ireland as a Catholic nation. That was changing. You understand?
Yeah.
It's the shadow again. It's like it's resistance to change. See, I have to keep reminding myself of that as well. You have a big thing here in Europe, like where you know, Europe is changing massively.
Yeah.
It's probably heading towards an Islamic you know, continent.
It really looks like that.
You know, and then a part of me says, like tonight I was talking to a Muslim guy in the village where I live, and he's a lovely guy, and his wife is lovely, and they're just people from Pakistan who came to Ireland to make a life for themselves, and they built a business. And it's like, and then I say, so, well, it doesn't include, it's not about him.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, it is about him. It is about him. He's a Muslim guy, but he's nice, and I'm not something. So it's like, my attitude now is like, okay, I just can't go with the flow.
Yeah.
And I can't stop. And then and the people who are against that, they say Europe should be Christian, but that didn't do us any fucking favors either. You know? So it's like I'm just trying to be as accommodating as possible, and to deal with it. It's I know there's a lot of bullshit that goes on, but this happens in life, and I mean, I just have to do my best and try and survive and live and let live.
Yeah.
The thing is that I'm not interested in being a hero. I'm interested in being an archive.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm interested in, being an archive. Look, though, okay, in 100 years' time, Europe will be an Islamic continent.
It's possible.
But if enough of us write books and save up and make videos and stuff like that, just like the Druids in the past, we'll be remembered in the future. And eventually, maybe Islam will change, and a new generation will come along and say, "Oh, did you ever hear about these guys called pagans?" And
Yeah.
that's my hope, because I have this belief. I saw this thing this week where they showed a video of two Muslim extremists setting fire to a Christmas tree in Brussels in Belgium.
Weird.
And the Christians were all pissed off, and I said, "Oh, okay, you just burned a Yule log.
Yeah.
You celebrated paganism." I have this fundamental belief that paganism will always triumph in the end. I believe that one day that the Islamic world will return to paganism. I believe that the Jewish world and Africa and America and Europe, I just have this because it aligns with nature. So just like the whole thing of the Kali Yuga.
Yeah.
I was talking to a Brahmin in Sri Lanka, and I said, "Well, how much longer for the Kali Yuga? 20,000 years?" And he goes, "Oh, Thomas, 400,000 years."
Oh God.
and I'm like, "Oh, okay." But he goes, "But that's only an enormous amount of time to you in your lifetime.
Yeah.
Not to the story of consciousness."
I love that.
Yeah. So it's just like, there we go. That makes sense.
It makes it a lot easier to sort of chill the fuck out and relax when you think about it that way. But I like that concept a lot too, that everything will return sort of to paganism because it is nature. Like there's no separation there. And that's the one thing that's going to, hopefully, at least in my understanding, be eternal is nature. Nature is eternal. So it makes sense to me that it would be like that. And, but I mean, I think it's still important, vitally important what you're doing, and people like you, like you're saying, is being an archive and recording these truths. Because I think you could always rediscover it again, but it's much easier to just stay connected to that thread as it continues than it is to lose it entirely, right?
Yeah, and also be reminded, like, paganism survived Christianity, so it'll survive everything else.
Yeah.
It'll survive Islam, and it'll survive transhumanism. It is the natural force of is a natural force of the cosmos. You just can't go against it. You cannot stop. I always think of King Canute, the English Anglo-Saxon king who tried to stop the ocean. He showed his subjects that you could not stop the tide, and he asked for his throne to be put with him in the sea, and he went like this, and he couldn't stop the tide. And I love the parable of King Canute not being able to stop the tide, to show his subjects, look, I'm just the current bullshitter.
That's awesome. And he knew it. He's a rare person. Oh shoot, I wanted to go back and touch on something about Islam. And I think one of the things that's hard about Islam coming into Europe and changing the culture there, or any culture going into another culture and changing it, is just that it seems like so many cultures are destroyed, and it seems like in destroying those cultures, it's obviously much easier for globalism and, empire to take over, and all of these things that sort of seem like a scourge on the earth, like materialism, and, when you're disconnected from that. And so it is, it's not to say that there's any culture that's better than another, but it's just, it feels like we should try harder to like keep sort of some sort of integrity within an area and a group of people. And not to say that we shouldn't mix or share ideas or whatever, but just that it's a shame when you lose that, you know, when it gets so infiltrated with another culture that it disappears. It's like you lose something that's very valuable, I think. And
Well,
so
look at the poor Native Americans, you know.
yeah,
You know, that's the classic example, the Aborigines in Australia.
right.
You know, and it's like, you know, that's you know, okay, they're still there.
They're still there.
They're not in a great shape,
No,
but they're not dead.
that's true.
Not dead. So, you know, even if you go into the Islamic world, you know, there's loads of remote areas in Iraq and in Iran and Pakistan and Afghanistan where remnants of paganism survive.
Yeah.
You know, so you know, it's not all black and white. It's not as, you know, it just like in Ireland, when Ireland was, that's the irony. That's something I always think about. When Ireland was the most Catholic, it was the most pagan. Isn't that fascinating, isn't it?
Wait, say it again.
When Ireland was the most Catholic, it was also the most pagan.
Oh, it's almost like what you like fight against, like get
Yeah,
stronger.
yeah.
That is interesting. I like that concept too, because maybe it's like a muscle. It's being like toned this whole time. When it does come back, it'll be like even stronger.
Yeah, the shadow thing again. Yeah.
I love that. Well, what are you working on currently that people might want to hear more about? Do you have any projects or?
Yeah, I have I used to travel all over the world doing speaks and stuff, talks and stuff like that. And I got bored of that, mainly because I've said everything I'm ever going to say.
Yeah.
for now anyway. So I took a break from all that. And instead, I've been just like what I've always done. I've got back to the roots of going to ancient sites with cameras and making films about it.
Cool.
And so I have a channel called Beyond Room 313, which I'm trying on YouTube, which I'm trying to make more professional videos. I've discovered the art of filmmaking and really worked on that, and film editing. Started out really crap. I was like, but now I'm starting to get the hang of it. I think I can start to now make decent films. And so the art of filmmaking caters to all my own artistic creative outlets: music, filmmaking, visual arts. So it appeals to me that way. I made a film recently on the American writer H.P. Lovecraft.
Cool.
Called Liber Providence, which got quite a lot of acclaim and is up for an award here in Ireland as an independent film. And that's sort of where I am. The next project will be to write a book on the magical nature of Lovecraft's writing, not in terms of the Necronomicon as a grimoire or anything like that, but in terms of the idea of the instinctual magician. And I'll be fleshing the script of that book, that film, out to a full book, incorporating things like the artist H.R. Geiger and the American artist Charles Birchfield. The idea that I'm very interested now in the idea of instinctual shamanism, instinctual magicians, people who may have shied away from the concept. James Joyce, the Irish writer, would be a classic example. Someone who may have not necessarily been an overt magician or a mystic, but who definitely brought that to the fore through their work instinctually. And so, you know, the whole thing with Lovecraft, because he's an American Protestant, he materialistic atheist, he was anti anything supernatural, but that's actually who was his shadow too as well. So the film Liber Providence was like I went to the Necronomicon convention in Providence back in the summer in the USA, and I basically caused a lot of trouble by walking up to academics and telling them, no, this, you know, like this is hilarious. America, I absolutely adore America. I love it, right? However, the Christian thing, it's like, come on, guys, get over it. You know, this kind of the Judeo, as they call it over there, the Judeo-Christian thing, right?
Yeah.
And they were talking about the sacredness of Lovecraft's writings, and a big audience in a hall in Providence. And I asked the question, and I said, if you take Lovecraft's work and look at it not from a Abrahamic Judeo-Christian sense, but from a polytheistic concept, Hinduism, Indo-European paganism, his pantheon of work takes on a whole other meaning. You could have heard a feckin' pin drop in that. And then
I love that.
This very nice man who's an expert on theology comes up and says, well, we've got better translations of the King James Bible now. Like, his reference for spirituality could not extend beyond the Middle East and Martin Luther. You know, you know, as nice a man as he was.
Yeah.
So I went there and I spoke to loads of people, and I
you pissed them all off.
Nicely, and I got like, if I one, and then I said, you know, and then there was absolutely no one there who had a genuine interest in the occult, and that shocked me.
Wow.
I even met this Wiccan lady who was like some big shot Wiccan lady, and I started to have a conversation with her about the pantheon of gods in terms of a new American paganism, and she was like, I was talking to the wall, and I wasn't talking down to the lady or anything like that. Yeah. It was just, I was trying to, let's talk, let's
connect. Yeah.
You know, so I'm going to write a book on Lovecraft after Christmas. Well, I was going to start the Christmas holidays and finish it before Inbox or before the Beltane, and get that out, because that's, to me, is a big thing. America has I really do believe that Lovecraft, through his writing, was developing the new American pagan pantheon. And I'm also fascinated by the megaliths of America. America is filled with megaliths, and no one ever seems to really understand this.
No one cares.
Them? Does it matter? I don't care. You know, the fact is they exist, and there is a story there to unravel, you know. And you know, it's this kind of thing. It's like I'm just, that's really it's funny. It's like, I've done Europe, I've done Asia, and now I'm fascinated by the Americas, North America, South America. And it's like, where's the story? That's my world going forward. I'm fascinated by the Americas now in terms of their own ancient story. I just recently did a film. I'm fascinated by the concept of giants as well.
Yeah.
I really do believe that giants did exist, and it may have to do with gravitational changes in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Malta. I've been to Malta a few times, and I was over there very recently. And Malta I made a film on the giants of Malta on the Beyond Room 313 channel. And Malta is, it's these, you have these stories of like Malta, Sardinia, and other places of these giant people who existed, but they seem to have lived at the same time Homo sapiens lived. And the thing is that the folklore and all these cultures say the giants built these megaliths.
Yeah.
Right? We inherited them. And I mean, if you see the film I've done on the giants of Malta on that channel, you'll just see these enormous blocks of stone. My own theory, and I'm grabbing this one for myself, and I don't often grab theories for myself, but this one I'm grabbing, is that they were forced to become semi-aquatic because of changes in gravity, and they had to live in the sea for buoyancy.
Wow.
And that's why they chose living on islands, because islands were safe for them, because they would have been easy prey for wild animals. And if you look at the statues and the ancient artwork of the statues they've dug up from these sites in Malta, they're people that look like they're being weighed down by massive amounts of gravity.
Wow.
And that was my theory. And this echoes all over the world, that there may have been a shift in gravity. And that's why we say, how did the ancients move those stones? Like the Temple Gigantea and Gozo in Malta, how did they pick up these lintels and slot them into the walls? These 60 lintels, 30 feet off the ground.
It doesn't make any sense.
I know, and this, like Baalbek, and that just goes on and on. There's things. I mean, there's one place in Sardinia I was in a few years ago called they all call them giants' temples, and there was like they carried the stones up the side of a mountain, like a serious mountain, and built this massive temple on the top. And some of the stones are as big as my living room, and they're on top of the thing. And they say, oh, they pulled them up with they didn't do it with pulleys and logs. It's impossible. And I also do believe that in the whole thing that like Brian Forrester and Graham Hancock and others believe that there was ancient high technology in a different previous civilization. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
That seems
absolutely no doubt about it. we don't really know what our history was before the so-called birth of civilization in Sumeria. And that's why people come to me, oh, the Anunnaki. Hold on a second, come on. Are you being sold a string of shit here? You know, is
Yeah.
this the new Christianity? Why is it always Babylon? What, you know, when we know that all these sites, for instance, there's a place down the road here, Carramore in Sligo, and it's Swedish archaeologists dug the ancient site up and found the initial carbon dating was 10,000 BC.
Wow.
And these Swedish guys had the latest equipment that they developed in Sweden and were dating stuff all over the world with absolute accuracy.
Wow.
They told the Irish archaeologists that the date of the stone, the dolmen structure was 10,000 BC. The Irish archaeologists said, go back and get the right date or we'll cut off your funding.
Because they don't have a way of accepting any data that's outside of what they already decided, which is the opposite of what it should be.
The Irish archaeologist said, we cut off your funding if you don't get the right date. What's the right date? 3000 BC.
You're like, okay, this is how all of science works now. It's just like another religion. It has no actual, there's regular people are better scientists than most scientists because they're actually willing to update their ideas about something with new data, which
I go to all these ancient sites around, like I go to all the archaeological digs around Ireland, and it's always the same, right? You have the ditch down below the trench where you have the young archaeological students. 9 out of 10 will be women. Women are fascinated by archaeology, right? Young girls, right? They've got these smiles on their faces. They're loving it. It's a great adventure digging into the past. You will have the senior archaeologist, who's usually a guy in his 60s or a woman in her 60s, sitting there with a stern face or very well trained to deal with you. And they'll say, how are you? Welcome to our site. They've done their media and communications courses, kind of thing. Oh, yes, this was built during the Bronze Age. Okay. Why is it lower than the Neolithic, deeper under the ground than the Neolithic one? This kind of thing.
Yeah.
Oh, well, there's been changes in the climate. And the young girls are digging away and they're having a great time and they're archaeology students. And you come back a few years later and all those young women who wanted to study archaeology have moved on to another field because the sense of wonder and adventure and imagination has been completely robbed from them by the orthodoxy.
That's sad. Because that is where truth comes from, is that stage of like wonder and looking at things with that fresh sort of eye of like, what could it be? It could be anything, instead of this very narrow sort of, which comes with conditioning. And that's very sad. I wanted to touch back to the gravity change, in this like precursor civilization that like maybe there was giants on the earth, and if they did disappear, then that gravity change might be why. Because it just struck me that something that could change gravity dramatically would be like a solar or like a celestial event, right? And some people think that like maybe we had another sun, or maybe Saturn was closer, or there's all these kinds of ideas about how the celestial bodies maybe changed. And there's also that thing where they used to describe the ocean as like wine colored, and now it's like blue. And so I wonder if all of those things are sort of the same cataclysmic change that happened, changed gravity and got rid of Atlantis. And what do you think about all that?
Yeah, I'm definitely open to all that stuff, because definitely the what was his name, Velikovsky.
Oh yeah,
World Motion and Planets in Motions. He did make a great argument. And
I still need to read that.
His theorem was proved when he said that Venus would be a lot hotter than it should be. And he was bang on about that.
Huh.
How Venus was much too hot. Venus is not that far from the Earth, relatively, in the cosmos.
Yeah.
And it's boiling on the surface. And he said that was a direct result of these planets who collide and caused all this stuff. And it's all over mythology of the skies changing, the sun stopping still, and all these other kinds of things. Yeah, I mean, I'm down with a lot of that. I mean, the Atlantis thing has to absolutely be true. There's too much. You have Okay, you have, like, I don't believe, you see, this is one of the problems with Atlantis because of the Plato thing. They think it's one city. Atlantis was a massive civilization. It's basically megalithic Europe. That's why the further you go west, the west of Ireland, the west of France, the Scotland, Orkney, the megaliths get older. They should be more later because they've told us that civilization has moved from the Middle East into the West. They're older. And so, there's something happened that caused the seas to rise and the land to flop. Something happened. This is pre-Ice Age. I'm talking about like 12,000 years ago, whatever. Right. Randall Carson has done some very good work on this. Now, you have the story, Doggerland. Doggerland is this massive land area between England and Holland that's not that deep underwater. And they for years, I mean, it was actually one of the main sources of ivory on Earth, because the English fishermen and Dutch fishermen used to pull up mammoth tusks off the seabed. Wow. Now, there's loads of megaliths down there. That's probably the plain of Vigrid in the Norse saga of Ragnarok, when the land sunk and was flooded. Oh. Now you have in the Irish tradition Tír na nÓg, the land of the young, beyond the western shore. There's always this thing in Irish mythology that beyond the west, there was another land that vanished. You have it in Portugal. Now, in my book, The Druid Code, I display a map that shows the sea level rises from 6000 BC. And, you could walk from Ireland all the way down to Sicily and probably across to Malta. Wow. It was all above land. Something happened that caused the sea levels to drastically rise, and that's probably Atlantis wasn't one place. It was a civilization along the western coast of Europe, Iberia, all the way down possibly into Sicily in Italy, and lots of North Africa as well. Wow. And something happened. Just something happened, and the mythology is a great way of our ancient ancestors didn't have the language and the vernacular, particularly in the post-apocalyptic, what they experienced, Atlantean thing, right, to describe things in a scientific term. So they told us in parables and allegory. Now, there's a story here, not far from here, the beach is not far from here, of an ancient Irish mythological story called the Black Pig. And what the story tells us is a gigantic black pig came ashore at Enniscrone Beach. It ran right across Ireland, carving valleys and digging out land. To the other side on the Irish Sea, it retreated back into the ocean. And in its wake, it left the land destroyed and poisoned. That's a tsunami.
Yeah.
Tsunami.
That totally describes a tsunami.
Yeah. And that's the language they would have used to describe these things.
Especially to someone who had never experienced anything like that, but does know what a boar does to the ground.
Exactly. And I got the video on my open source occult TV channel called The Black Pig Tsunami. And that's what it talks about. And it talks about the land was poisoned. And all across between this part of Ireland on a parallel course right across to the east coast, there's the Black Pig Trench, the Black Pig's Dyke, the Black Pig's Valley. These were lands that were carved out by the tsunami. Wow. And this is how the ancestors described these things. And Atlantis was the same. We live in an age where we can describe these things in scientific language. But if you lived in a more poetic, epic, mythological, story, folklore kind of way, you would describe your experiences in that. How many love songs actually state, he met me, he shagged me, he dumped me? Okay. They're not like that. Those songs go, he was the star that rose in the morning, right. Our love was like a flower that blossomed in the spring and then died like it's the same thing, Right. This is why mythology and people like Joseph Campbell have been so fantastic for the human race, in that they've allowed us to understand that the metaphor and the allegory is more realistic than the direct pedantic statement.
Yeah. And it's often, it's probably more true than like our histories even can be, because we know that they are manipulated and, written by the victors and all of that. So, I mean, it might be the most accurate that we can really get.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. So, if you were going to direct people, you're kind of moving away from the open source occult TV and towards the Beyond Room 313?
Yeah, Beyond 313.
313, sorry.
Beyond Room 313. My website is www.mossuponstones.com. And that's basically it. And that and my bullshitting on Facebook, and then you've got everything you need.
Well, I was always so sad because I can't be your friend on Facebook because you're maxed out.
But you can still read the jokes. See, I'm a big believer in the bard. I'm a big believer in bardic magic. That because you want to take the system down. Shakespeare and the rest showed us the way. The bard takes the system down.
So what's interesting? I think you're onto something there, because in the Latin language, I just started studying through Duolingo. I'm doing Latin, and the word for bard is the same word for seer.
There you go. And in fact, when the Druids ended in Ireland, when Christianity came to Ireland, the Druids never ended. They became something called the Fila, where bards, and they were considered so, they were told you could do anything you wanted except practice religion, pagan religion. And what they did was the Druids existed in Ireland in the 1600s, and they were bards, and they could take down a kingdom by writing a joke.
Wow.
Or a clever song, or a parody.
Because that's like the earliest memetics, right? Like that's them. They're like, here's the idea we want to infect the culture with.
Well, it's like Alan Moore said, if someone writes a funny song about you that ridicules you, not only will it curse you in this life, but it will curse you in other lives.
Forever.
Even when you're dead. He was right about that. That's why the bard was so feared in Celtic society, because a good bard could write a funny song or a poem or a joke about you, and you were finished. No matter how big your army was.
See, I love this. This kind of cycles back to that idea of like, how do we change the world, or how do we like get people to wake up? And it's like, you probably can't, but you could tell a really excellent story or make this really excellent song, or have this idea that you send out into the culture. And if it's effective enough, like that'll keep going forever, maybe.
Well, I talk to a lot of Americans and they say, well, where's our revolutionists in the modern age? And I go, Richard Pryor, George Carlin, Bill Hicks.
Yes. It's true.
Even South Park.
Yeah.
You got them. They're there.
That's true. I love that. There's hope in that. So if you had to kind of give anybody who's listening some sort of advice or idea about, how they can go about either learning more or being better people, what would you say?
Enjoy your life, first of all. Create. If it's just a hobby or painting or poetry or songs or music, create, because that's banging the universe going forward. Yeah. Don't allow yourself to be swayed by dogma and paranoia. Those things are fleeting. If you look at the great art of the ancient world, they came from a time where there was dogma and paranoia. But what do we remember of them? We remember the beauty. You look at a painting from the Renaissance, you don't think of all the battles and the wars that took place in the Italian peninsula at the time. You just say, oh my gosh, that's a fucking beautiful painting.
Yeah.
Well, live a fucking beautiful life, and that's it.
I love that. That is the best thing you can do. Well, fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing. This has been your analog, electric, concentric dose of wisdom, according to Thomas Sheridan. Thomas, thank you so very much for being here tonight. This has been excellent.
I'm delighted to have come. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you. The past reaches out to us, whispering of what was. The memory of what came before connects us to the power of ourselves. We cannot live broken and divided. It is up to us to peer into the hidden crevices of what used to be and to find the thread that led to this moment, here and now. Only in a truly intertwined existence of past, present, and future can we take back our birthright of sovereignty over ourselves and our lives. And until you reconnect with your soul's path, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first.
It's a one-on-one lesson, so do your homework. Make your dome hurt while up on earth. My bones are blessed from holy dirt. Vibes manifested to words that told me search for verbs and adjectives to describe birth. Worth more than one can speak, while the tongue feeds a weak, a sour taste in your mouth, bittersweet. Words can also kill you when you sleep, mind condition. Low frequencies while the subconscious mind listens. I can tell a vision filled with lies, disguised as truth, and spread it like the word to the youth. Watch the tube. A place where the God is food is sorcery. To recreate the God forgery does more than meets the eye. Not too many know. Just hear me flow like the eye of Horus Pinio. Yeah, not ready to leave until we believe we're free to go. You hear me? Yo?
Sculpted from the ether, the material will eat ya. Stuck on this plane, lanes use jet fuel to greet ya. The dimensional three ain't meeting me on top of the fourth. Didn't climb Jacob's ladder to squab with a sword. Forge with Yggdrasil, branch down, try quiet your lamps now. Ascension past the matter that they slam out they damn mouths. We ain't on land now, but they over understand. Sacrificing wisdom, hoarding dumber, kosher, wicked hands. Putting faith in worthless worship of the mortals. Artificial portals, mass ingestion of the black goo, bioengineered morsels. Conversing with machine elves, bypassing maggots. They stuck on Android screens now. I'm scrolling emerald tablets. Moloch living lavish, off the back to the savage. Them clasped hands at the Sabbath, smack of energy damage. They done twisted the tongues with nanotech in the lungs. The awakening's begun. All they really can do is fucking run.